And thank you, men at the back, the sergeant of arms back there. Uh, I, as shared, been a principal most of my life, and certainly didn't feel inclined to move out of country. But I knew it was the Lord speaking to me one day. Move to Israel. I thought, oh, you're kidding. Really, Lord? I've got 22 grandchildren here. I got a farm and horses and a great job, and but it was the voice of the Lord. Now, if you are a person of prayer, raise your hand if you are. You all of us should be. You will know the voice of the Lord if you really pray. And I knew it was his voice. Called my wife. I said, the Lord just spoke to me to move to Israel. Well, we don't have enough money to move. If you work in a Christian school, you don't have a lot of money. They just have lower salaries, and it's okay. I'm not complaining, but that's a fact. So we sold stuff that we had in our home, and we realized we didn't need all that stuff. Do you agree with that? You got stuff that you really don't need. Um, and so we were able to get a nest egg, and part of the help of that, I had guys a '64 Corvette convertible, red with a black top. So that helped us go to Israel. So I sold that. I sold those things and saddles and rings and coins, and had enough for maybe 2.5 years in Israel. Okay. I thought, God, we're going to obey you and just step out by faith. And now it's been 11 years. Why has it been 11 years? Because God keeps providing the need. And I praise the Lord for that. My wife is uh, at home now. Well, actually, she's playing music almost every night for revival. And she's been a pianist for 40 years. And then when she's in Israel, of course, she plays in Israel at the oldest Protestant church in all of Israel. So I'm thankful that those doors open. If you want to know what I do there, I've helped for 11 years in a food kitchen for the poor. Okay, it's in Jerusalem. That's where my little apartment is, with the refrigerator this big. And this big of stove. I mean, my stove is this big, really. I've got one burner, but I love it. If you're called to a place, I believe you will sense a contentment no matter how difficult it is. And so we're very happy to be there. And so tonight, and feel free to ask questions at the end. If you're curious about something, now please ask. But what I've done lately, the last few years, God opened some wonderful doors where near Gaza, after the war started in 2023, I felt compelled, again, that voice on the inside, go down and help those involved in the war, the Jews that were next to Gaza, that were being hammered by missiles. 20,000 missiles crossed the border, to give you an idea. And so I went down there and I said, I'm just obeying God. I don't have enough money to do this, but I did write on Facebook a little paragraph. If you guys would help me, Facebook friends, send money to help these Jewish people, because 50,000 in that area lost their jobs immediately and they're struggling. Okay. And so I wanted to be a help. And so I'm expecting maybe $4,000 to come in, and $115,000 came in to help the Jewish people. So to be able to stand in front of them, and many of the Jews have kind of a negative opinion about Christians because they know history well, and many Christians were brutal toward Jews. I'm just telling you, in history, you can, even Martin Luther, famous ones, were brutal. And even Adolf Hitler confessed to be a Christian. Of course, he wasn't a good Christian, no question, but he confessed that, and Jews remember that. So for me as a Christian to work with the Jews, it doesn't usually happen well. There's a definite separation. But the deputy mayor of Ashkelon, the largest city next to Gaza that's Jewish, She came to me and said, "Can I partner with you? You're Jewish, you're a leader in this city, you want to partner with me, a Christian?" Yes. We partnered together, and she would bring me 7 families every week, and I would stand in front of them and hand them money and say, "This is from Christians to bless you during this difficult time." And then get to pray with them. And I'm telling you, it was a miracle. And I ended up helping, going back week after week, helping 140 families. So God was faithful. So that's what I've been involved in lately, because we've been in continual war for 3 years and trying to help people there. So this is where I live, actually. This pointer will not, yeah, it'll show you. I live in that building right there. Do you all see that? And the tiny little apartment on the 18th floor. So I had great view of the missiles from Iran to Tel Aviv. I said, "Oh, there comes another one." It was over and over and over. And thankfully, none hit my building. This, who knows what that is? I'm sorry? No, this building here, that is a mosque. But what's interesting about that building is, out of millions of acres in the Middle East, literally millions, the Muslims picked the acre where Solomon's temple was. Is that bizarre? So they put their mosque 1,300 years ago on that spot of Solomon's temple, and it still stands there. It is sad, and it's caused a great controversy, because the Jews want to come up there and worship next to the temple, near where the holiest of holies are, and they're forbidden generally to even come up on this whole area that you see down here. That's the Temple Mount, and this is where the temple stood, and now it's a mosque dedicated to Muhammad, which is very sad. Okay, so let's see if this picks it up, my friend. And I'm going to step out here because this has a signal, but sometimes if you're not close enough, it doesn't pick up. Let's see how it does. It's not picking up, friend. So I'm going to say next to him, and it's because this little device will only. Now, if I stand in the middle and you all turn around, then it will work. Okay. Israel. This is the title of this. And I'm an educator, so if you start to fall asleep, I'm going to come back there and tap you on the shoulder. It says, Israel against all odds. Israel should not be here. The Jews should not be here. Do you know 6 different countries have tried to eradicate the Jews? I mean, Germany is one of them, but there have been many others. The Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, and you go on. And they're still here today. Why? It's because of God. God has the last word. Now, the Arabs may gnash at their teeth. We want every Jew, and they've told this to me, we want every Jew gone from Israel. Every Jew, everyone. I said, where did they go? Well, go back to their homes. Well, their homes, many of them are in Israel. Where would they go? So they don't have an answer for that. In other words, they have to either be destroyed, killed, or moved. And that's really what they feel. There are 57 Muslim nations. You know how many Jewish nations? 1. It's hard to believe. There are 2 billion Muslims, 2 billion, and 1/100th of the population are Jews, 16 million. I mean, and yet they want that little piece of land that's 1/5 the size of my state of Kentucky. That's how tiny it is. Okay, next. Let's say this together. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. That was written 2,600 years ago. So the Jews, Abraham's children, and are considered the apple of God's eye. In other words, can I say a favorite? They were. They were his chosen people, of course. Next. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. This is God speaking to Abraham. How are you going to make me a great nation? I have one child that is really, I've cast aside Hagar's son. So I really have no children, and you're going to make me a great nation. Next. And make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And this is, I'm going to talk about that in a second. The Jews are such an incredible blessing. I'm not Jewish, but wish I had some Jewish blood in me. But that that commandment, and that was 4,000 years ago, God speaking to Abraham, listen, I'm not going to just bless you because God said 40 times in Genesis, I'm going to bless you, bless you, bless you. One time he said right here, and you, Jews, shall be a blessing. And we're going to learn just a little about how they bless the world. Next. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. Next. Look around you from where you are to the north, south, east, and west. Next. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring. How long is that? That's forever. And now, why is that so important from written in Genesis 4,000 years ago? Is because that's the biggest controversy right now, with even with presidents of the United States saying, you Jews need to split that country in half and give part of it to the Arabs and you keep the other part. Well, that doesn't go along with Scripture, I'm just telling you. The Scripture is right here. All the land that you see, which was the modern day Israel, I'm going to give it to your offspring forever. And would you rather believe man, even the presidents for 30 years, or believe God? And I choose to believe God. So the Jews in Israel don't want to split the land in half. They realize, you saw what's happened with Gaza, a small border where 20,000 rockets went across, killed many Jews. If you split the land in half, they wouldn't have a little area. They would have 300 miles of border where they could lob missiles right into Israel. You understand? It's not even practical. So we don't need to split Israel. Next. Now, this is Moses leaving um, Egypt. Now, I want to talk to you about increase. Moses entered, not Moses, but the children of Israel, the Jews entered Egypt because of Joseph. All of you know the story, the famine. You remember? How many do you think, how many Jews entered Egypt? All the Jews in the world entered Egypt. Wasn't that many? How many? Thank you, Pastor. 70. Say 70. 430 years later, they estimate, now this is an estimate because they do have a number there of fighting men. It was almost over 600,000. So we estimate with the children, the women, about 3 million people. So left with entered 70, now 3 million. They are prospering. Psalm 1 says, whatsoever you do will prosper. And the Jews were just soaring. And they were enslaved, of course, but in spite of that, they were being blessed. And they were increasing so much. The Pharaoh said, enough, kill the babies. So they leave there with 3 million. Can you imagine women? Think about this. 40 years in that desert, and I've been in Sinai Desert. It is miserably hot. 40 years, no bathrooms. Isn't that hard to believe? That Moses could keep order without a bathroom and without many other things that, you need day to day. Moses was a gifted leader, no question about it. Next. And then this is the route they took, which took them 40 years in orange. The route, if they had obeyed, would have gone from the Nile Delta straight to Canaan. How long? 3 weeks. 3 weeks. But because of disobedience, it took them 40 years. Okay, next. And after 40 years, of course, Moses couldn't cross, but the children of Israel did into Jericho, into the Israel land of Israel, and they defeated. Anyway, they divided the land in 12 parts. 3 of the tribes were to the right of the Jordan River. That's Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. That's actually in Jordan today, but back then it was a part of Israel. So 12 tribes are assigned. And if you want to know where Gaza is, because we talk a lot about Gaza the last few years, Phoenicia. See it at the bottom, Philistia. Okay, that's where Gaza is today. Very ancient city. Next. Now, what happened? We went through, in fact, go back one, I'm sorry. Israel went through 400 years of judges, and I'm just going to give you one judge, Gideon, okay? And there were many others. And some were good and some not as good. But that's how they organized Israel with judges. Then Israel said, we want a what? King, just like the other neighbors. We want a king. And so God gave in to them. And who was the first king? Who knows? Huh? No, almost. Saul first. He did very well at the beginning and then did not so well toward the end of his life. Then the second one was who? You just said it, David. And then the third one was David's son, Solomon. Now, I want you to understand this. By the time Solomon reigned, no war, virtually no war. It was the pinnacle. Israel was soaring like an eagle. There were 5 million people. There was so much gold coming into Israel at that time that Solomon, and this is from neighboring nations that wanted to appease or be friends with Israel because they were terrified of the power of Israel. Okay? Even today, they are. Israel's the only nation in the Middle East that has an atomic weapon. So they were terrified, and they would bring them gold like, don't mess with us. We're your friends. There was so much gold coming into Israel that Solomon built a temple, which actually the footprint of that temple is not probably a lot bigger than this church. It was a small dwelling, really. It's some bigger than this. But in that small building, $300 million worth of gold. Is that amazing? Where did they get it all? Partly the neighbors. The neighboring countries gave it to them. Okay, so after Solomon started out well, wrote the Proverbs, such a wise man, but toward the end of his life, boy, he got hooked up with women just a little over the edge. Would you say 1,000? Guys, how many of you could handle even half that many? How about 2? So after Solomon, his son had a number of sons, but who took over was Rehoboam. Say that. Rehoboam. Now, was Rehoboam smart? No, he was a little stupid. And he decided to rule with an iron fist. What did the people of Israel say about that? 10 of the tribes took off to the north, where you see Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh. They took off up that area. 10 of the 12 tribes left. Could be ruled by this guy with an iron fist. And Jeroboam became their leader in the north. Now, what was bad about that group was almost immediately they began idol worship. I've been up in that area. I've seen the areas that they burn sacrifice to golden calves and different things. They became wicked. Every king was wicked. I'm going to give you the name of one, Ahab and Jezebel. Ahab was just an example of an evil king in the north. Remember how many tribes are up there? 10. Okay, so finally God said, enough. I can't find a righteous king out of all these. So after 200 years, if you look to the right, it says Arameans, but further to the right, that is where the Assyrians lived, today's Syria, and they took them into captivity. 10 tribes. Now, what happened ultimately with those 10 tribes? Anybody know? We don't know. They're called the lost tribes of Israel because we really don't know. So, do you see Israel because of disobedience? What are they doing? They were 5 million. They're diminishing, aren't they? Slowly diminishing. And finally, after the southern two tribes were all that was left. Okay? And they hung around for 140 more years. And then they started doing the same thing as the north. This king named Manasseh started burning his own children in fire, sacrificing to Moloch, a foreign god. What do you think God said? Enough. We sent the 10 tribes away, and now the last two, you're out of here. And so they went to what country? Those last two tribes. Anyway, starts with a B. Babylon, thank you. And they stayed there for anybody know how many years? 70 years. So they're being punished by God. The difference in the 10 tribes and the last two is the two tribes did come back, not all of them, but to show how much Israel had diminished. At their peak, how many million? Remember? Everybody say 5 million. Okay, that was about 1,000 BC, for Christ. 586 is when they went into Babylon 70 years later. 70 years later, when they returned home to Israel, 43,000. So they went from 5 million to 43,000. They lost over 99% of their population because of one word. What is it? Sin. Sin. Disobedience. Okay? So they rebuild from the rubble, and it was just such a difficult time. Next, and of course, this was the burning of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar and his men, and it was rubble when they came back after 70 years. They had to rebuild, and the temple they rebuilt was not near as nice as Solomon's temple. They didn't have the gold, they didn't have the craftsmanship, but it was still a temple. Next, and then a 500-year period where they were controlled by different empires, like the Greek Empire or the Persian Empire. Finally, the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was in control for about 400 years, but also during the time of Jesus. Now, Jesus was living around a lake. We call it the sea, but what is the Sea of Galilee? And I've been there many times. And it's, it's 10 miles across, but it's really not a big sea. That was his home. He lived in Capernaum, and he would preach all around that huge lake, let's call it, to the Jews around the lake. And Capernaum was where he lived, okay? Next. Now, 40 years after he ascended, he lived to 33. 40 years afterwards, this is what happened again. Jerusalem was destroyed this time by the Romans. Titus, the general, came in with 50,000 Roman soldiers because the Jews were rebelling, just kind of like we did with England. We don't want to be controlled by England. They didn't want to be controlled, the Jews, by the Romans. Do you understand that? So they rebelled, and Rome was brutal. I mean, if you mess with them, they're coming in and they're going to wipe you out. And they killed 1.1 million Jews, AD 70. And those that they didn't kill, they enslaved. It was horrible. But remember that date, AD 70 until 1948, almost 2,000 years, there was no Israel. There was no Israel. They named it Palestina, and then they had some other names for it, but there was no Israel. And most of the Jews were banished. And when the Jews were banished that survived, where did they go? They went up to Europe. They went to northern Africa. They went to Asia. Next. And this is what they were termed, the wandering Jews. That's a Jewish family of 6 kids. Why did they call them wandering Jews? This is interesting. Almost all the nations they went to expelled them. Why? Because they were Jewish. That is the reason. Now, that's what anti-Semitism is, that you can't really put a finger on it. Were they terrorists? Absolutely not. They brought so much good to these countries in Europe and Africa, Example, they were the top businessmen, they were the top inventors in the world. They still are. The number one inventors are Jewish. The top physicians in the world, more millionaires per capita, are Jewish than any other group. See, so what they would bring was good things to the countries, and the countries would let them come in and help their country, and their countries, just like Joseph blessed Egypt, their countries would increase with Jews. And then what did the leaders do after 100 years or 200 years? You're out of here. You're out of here. And that would bring actually a curse to that nation. Give you an example. The nation in the early 1500s that was the wealthiest nation in the world was Spain. Think of Christopher Columbus and all the ships that followed him and brought back gold after gold, shiploads of gold. They were number one. But what did they do? They expelled the Jews, and they went from number one to one of the lowest prosperous nations. And it's because they cursed the Jews. They expelled them out. So that happened with 29 nations. Next. And even in this exciting, we see it on TV, the Crusaders, yes, they came in to liberate the Holy Land from Muslims. The Muslims controlled the holy sites, like where Jesus was born in Bethlehem, where he was crucified, Golgotha, all those holy sites. The Muslims controlled and taxed Christian pilgrims that came in. So the Crusaders came down and they just, we're going to solve this issue. But why wasn't it entirely successful? Is because on their journey down from Europe, just imagine, from France and Italy and Spain and England, if they see a Jewish family, Jewish community, what would they do? They would slaughter them, men, women, and children. So when you curse the Jews, you will be what? You're going to be cursed. And so that's why the Crusades, I believe, were not successful. Next. And recognize him? Very good. Mark Twain. Name a book he wrote. Tom Sawyer. Very good. And Huck Finn. He was a great writer in the 1800s. 1865, he was asked to go to this remote area called Israel. Well, most people in the United States were Christians. Why? I'll go. And to write short stories about it. When he got there, he didn't know what to expect. It was so remote. And next, this is what he saw. He said he rode for 3 weeks on a camel before he saw the first person. 3 weeks. And he said, finally, when he got to Jerusalem, he said, it is a God-forsaken, desolate place. I see no trees. Who would want to live here? Okay, the Jews came back and totally reformed this country, which we'll show you. Next. And then another persecution up in the north, Russia. It was called pogroms, not programs, but pogroms. And it was systematic destruction of Jews up in Russia. And so a Jewish community, they usually stuck together. They would be there for 200 years or so. And then the Russians would come in and say, you're out of here by tomorrow. Well, we've been here 200 years. But that's what the pogroms were. They all around the world, they persecuted Jews. Why? Because they were Jewish. Next. And then you come with Adolf Hitler, the biggest anti-Semitic man in the world, ever probably. And he was obsessed with killing every Jew in Europe. So was he just wanting to kill the Jews in Germany? Absolutely not. That was just part of it. He wanted to conquer all the European countries and kill every Jew, and he killed 90% of them in 6 years. It's unbelievable. And it so obsessed him, many historians say he was winning the war for the first 2.5 years. But he was so obsessed when they started sending them to concentration camps, 1941, 1942, he started losing the war. Why? Because he was cursing the Jews. Where at 1945, finally, he realized never did humble himself as he should have and said, I was wrong. Never did that. But he knew that The enemies were coming, surrounding Berlin, Germany. And so he shot himself. And they put his body in a trough and set him on fire. Next. And that's the concentration camp. We'll talk about that in a second. Next. That's how they slept. And you see that, and you have no idea that there were literally millions of fleas in the barracks. Millions. Just constantly tormenting these precious people who were skin and bones, those who survived. Next. You want to know what we have of Adolf Hitler left? There you got it, right in front of you. It's the Russians were able to retrieve his burned body. We only have his skull left. See the bullet hole? It's sad. Next. And then this was another one just about as bad as Adolf Hitler. They say he was responsible for killing 30 million people in Russia. 29 years he was dictator. And his name, anybody know his name? Well, you're a smart group. Joseph Stalin. And he decided he hated Jews too. Now, this is after World War II, after Hitler had shot himself. 8 years later, from 45, this is 1953. And he decided, I'm going to kill the Jews. But I have to make it humane. So I'm going to send them all to Siberia, where it gets 40 degrees below zero. Okay, in kind of a humane way, I'm going to get rid of them. Now, how do I know what happens in Siberia? I've read the research. If you go to Siberian camps that they had there, work camps, you know how many returned back to Russia alive? 4%. So he was going to send 2 million Jews from Russia essentially to their death, a second Holocaust, 8 years after the first one was over. Is that horrible? I mean, it's just stunning. Next. And so what do you do? I wanted to show you this. Most people will not read this in their history books because it's kind of an obscure thing. But studying Jewish history is very important. So he sat down to sign a document, Stalin, that ordered 2 million Jews to Siberia, eventual death. Okay? He's sitting down at his desk. What happens? He drops dead. Say hallelujah. I mean, really, this guy was wicked, just like Hitler was wicked. Next. And there he is a few days later in his coffin. But his assistants refused to follow through with the orders. Thank God. Next. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone. Next. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. Next. I will make them one nation in the land. Way back over 2,500 years ago, this was written. The prophecy came true. Remember, 70 AD, there was no Israel from then till 1948, almost 2,000 years ago. And the United Nations voted in that Israel, they felt sorry for the Jews. United Nations usually is absolutely not supportive of Israel. But at that time, so many Jews were killed, they thought, yeah, they need an area. They need a place they can call their home. So they voted them in. Next. And the streets filled with Jews celebrating. We're finally, 1948, May 14th, 1948, we're finally our own nation. Next, raising the flag, Israeli flag. 1 day later, Israel is 1 day old, okay? A baby nation. 1 day later, next, 6 nations decided, again, we're going to annihilate the Jews. 6, they surrounded this little Israel. Now, I want you to hear this miracle because most people don't understand it. These 6 nations had airplanes, they had tanks, they had machine guns, high-level weaponry. Israel had none of that. Not one tank, not one machine gun, none of that. No boats, no navy. This group over here, the Muslims, were 100 fighters to 1 Jew. 100 to 1. A David and Goliath. Do you understand? Impossible, impossible. The Muslims were so confident that they were going to quickly win this war. They decided we can do it in 3 days. We'll wipe them out. And they should have, except for if God be for us, who can be? And that is true. Even though they were outnumbered 101, they didn't have one machine gun, one tank, one airplane. Say Israel won. Hallelujah. I'm telling you, that is incredible miracle. Since then, counting that war of independence, they have been in 10 wars. I've been there for 2 of the wars. 10 wars. How many do you think they won? 10. They're 10 for 10. They're undefeated. They're the heavyweight champs. Really, it's absolutely a miracle when we see what God does. Now, does that mean the the Jews are righteous? No. Does that mean they've converted to Christianity? Just a few in number. But what it means is God keeps his word. And when God says, I will bless you and bless your seed forever, he's keeping his word, isn't he? And how the Jews excel in everything, even their life expectancy. You think ours was high, it's 79. Ours is really high. Theirs is 83. You know, everything they rank near number one or near the top. God is good, but he shows us that his word is true by these miracle after miracle. Okay, next. And this is the way the 6 countries came in, and they were expected to win in 3 days, and they lost. And as a result of this, Israel gained more territory. And many of the wars, they gained even more and more. And that was a good thing to help Israel as far as a buffer zone. Next. Now, I'm taking you up to what just happened. And this is what I was telling you, October 7, 2023, the Lord spoke to me to come down and help. This is in Ashkelon and Sderot and some of the towns around there. They broke the wall down, if you're not familiar with it, 1,200 terrorists from Gaza, and totally took Israel by surprise. It was on a holiday, a religious holiday. They storm across the border and they go into communities called kibbutz, or kibbutzim is plural. And what did they do? Did they fight military people? Not usually. They just pulled families out and they massacred them. 1,200 Jewish people in one day. Now, what the news conveniently leaves out, and I'm going to tell you, because I work down there, and it made me angry because it's like the news doesn't want to offend Islam or the Muslims. And so they leave some important details. Out of those 1,200 killed in Gaza that day, next to Gaza in Israel, 600 of them they beheaded. Now, can you imagine beheading 2-year-old children, 3-year-old, 7-year-old? Half of them they beheaded, 600. And then the news also did not say that they also, as a practice, they would tie children together and set them on fire. Barbaric as you can imagine. I'm telling you, the things that I understood when working down there and heard that the news never told people because they don't want to offend anybody. Well, they offended the Jews. They should have told everybody in the world the whole story. Because what you had happen is the world, when Israel used their power, and they're strong, after 2 weeks, they come into Gaza and just start bombing away. But when they do, they kill some families. And that's unfortunate. The Muslims celebrate death, though. Do you understand that? They celebrate when one of their own gets killed or families. They become martyrs. You know, it's okay. It's okay. And so when Israel would warn them with leaflets dropped in an area in Gaza, we are coming in 24 hours to bomb this place. Please leave. Okay? So what does a family with 8 kids do? They have a lot of kids. They march out, and I saw this on film, but you won't see it, but I'm going to tell you what happened. So they march out of their houses, and the father leads, the family, and all the children behind him, and then the wife is at the end. So all of them are marching down the street because Israel's going to bomb this area. They get to the end of the street, and there's a 20-year-old with an AK-47, and he grabs the father. And I saw this on film. He put his hands behind his back, a ligature like handcuffs. And what did he do with the kids and the mother? Go back to your house. Wait, they're going to bomb it. They're going to bomb this area in 20. Go back to your house. And so they're obedient. They go back to their house. They risk being killed the next day. What did they do with the father? Okay, the person filming this showed the whole thing. They take him over. There was a large hole, a large pit, and they shoved him in the pit and shot him and killed him. Killed the father of 8 kids because he was trying to save his family. That's another thing the news doesn't tell you. That's part of the reason you had so many families killed, because they promote death instead of life. And it's sad. Next. And this is what you saw on the streets. It was horrifying for me, just horrifying. Next. And I stood in that area and I saw hundreds of rockets overhead. And I thank God none hit me, but it hit a lot of people that I knew. Next. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence and find out knowledge of witty inventions. The Jews are number one in the world for inventions. Amazing. Next. Now, I just have one, but I could put another 200 up here. We don't have time, of how God has equipped the Jews. I mean, Google, the computer, the first computer, the cell phones, and all kinds of medical devices, all created by Jews. Next. And this shows you just an example of their inventiveness and ingenuity. In 1909, Pastor, 1909, do you remember that? You know, I had a student years ago in public school, and that I was in middle school teaching history. And we were talking about the Revolution, George Washington, and she was very sincere. And she raised her hand and she said, "Did I meet George Washington?" And the sad thing is, nobody laughed. They thought, well, that's a legitimate question. And by the way, that's how bad it is in the public school as far as actually teaching basic facts. I have no clue. You're old, not that old. I'm 1 year older than him, I'll admit. But this shows you their ingenuity. These are about 200 Jews, and they're standing in front of sand dunes in 1909. The reason I mentioned that, Pastor, is because both sets of my grandparents were alive in 1909. So in other words, it wasn't that far away. 1909, they decided we need a city right here. Do you see any houses, any buildings? But their ingenuity, the Jewish ingenuity, next, that's the same spot, Tel Aviv. Is that amazing what they are able to accomplish? Next. And this is what you still see some of this in Israel. But what the Jews have been able to do is transform so much of this land, next, into this. They have great irrigation systems and great fertilizing. And as a result, the greatest fruit and vegetables I have ever had, and I've been in 56 nations, is Israel. The greatest. Next. How do you like that? Remember, I said they rank number one in so many areas? Strawberries, the largest in the world. I mean, is that amazing? My wife loves pomegranates here in the United States in Kentucky. They're about this big, size of a softball. Next, there's a pomegranate. Is that unbelievable? She loves to cut them up and get all the seeds out. Next. Does that make you hurt just a little? Oh. And this may sound insignificant. It's not. Each cow in Israel produces more milk than any cows in the world. Again, it's that favor of God. what God promised to bless them over and over. Next. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet. That is me today while I'm here. I can't be quiet. I have to share truth about Israel. Next. Now I'm going to share as we close. Pastor, am I doing okay with time? Okay, well, I'm almost finished. But this is a friend of mine right here. His name's Joseph. Joseph, I met with my wife drinking coffee, and I bumped up against his chair. We began a conversation and have become just super friends since then. But he told me his story, and it's just one of millions of stories like this. But he was 6 years old living in Germany with 8 brothers and a mother, okay? And he got this at the door. He heard the door knock. The mother goes to the door. May I help you? She opens the door. On the other side was a Nazi soldier. And he said, all of you need to come with me. Where are we going? No, you need to come with me with all your children. They obediently followed the Nazi to a train, got on the train. He was one of the kids. Took him to a place similar to Auschwitz, let him out, and somehow he got away from his family. He got separated. And you know that first day, his mother and 8 brothers were slaughtered. The first day. Can you imagine 6 years old having nobody left in your family? He miraculously made it for 4 years. And he told me different stories that I wish I could repeat to you, but I really can't repeat. It's that horrible what guards did to him. It's sadistic, it's barbaric, and I won't even mention it. But I will tell you one example. He was on work duty about 8 years old, and he's walking back with all the men and the ladies who, there's skin and bones, but they still have to work. And he spotted a potato in the dirt. He picks up the potato, Joseph. He looks around, he takes a bite in it, but he didn't realize there was a guard watching him. The guard came over and said, potatoes are for Germans, not Jews, and made him throw it down. Took him by the arm into the concentration camp, into a shed, sat him down, pulled out a pair of pliers, and pulled out all 10 of his fingernails for eating a bite of potatoes. The cruelty that they had to face. Honestly, it's hard for us to imagine. Can you imagine at 10 years old, he's released. Americans came in, thank God for America, and liberated these camps. Where does he go? There's no family. His father was already out of the picture. So what do I do? And so he ended up coming eventually to Israel, slept on a park bench near where I live for 9 months. And finally, somebody offered him a job. And he worked there for 30 years at a coffee shop. And he became a Christian. He gave his life, this Jewish man, to Christ. And I just rejoice. I mean, talk about the ashes he was in, and God has made something beautiful out of him. Next, and that's him today. That's my buddy. It just touches my heart. So I hope you've learned something. I hope this has impacted you. Let's bow our heads.